on the road again. We are still in the book of Isaiah. I know I slowed down here through this book, but I think it justifies the slowing down the speed at which we run. And I know if you say slow down the speed, I'm running through, even though I separated it we're going to end up doing 4 weeks on this book. But it's a foundational book for the rest of the prophets. There's 17 prophetic books, and Isaiah's the first of those prophetic books. Remember, there's more prophets. There's more prophets. We had prophets and the kings, that were talked about, but these are the prophetic books. So Isaiah is a foundational one. It's interesting. I don't know if I covered, even though this is the third week we're covering this, we did cover that this book's name is named after its prophet, which all these books that are coming up are going to be that. But the interesting thing I don't think I brought up, I might have, the name Isaiah means Yahweh is our salvation, or God saves. So it's a powerful name too. And I picked the word holy as the uber word, and I know we talked about that too. But the reason I did that is because it's two things. It's the first 5 chapters that we covered were God calling a court case against Israel and Judah, right? He called a court case. He had heaven and earth as his witnesses, and he called this case against it. And then we went into chapter 6. Hello, guys. We went into chapter 6, and the seraphim were around the throne of God, and they were saying, holy, 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 right? So that's why I drove down on holy. But in another word we could have used is God saves. The word that best describes this book, because that's the name of Isaiah. That's Isaiah's name, right? So a quick overview of where we are and where we're going. This is the 66 chapters, as we've seen this chart before. The first week we went through 1 through 5, that charge that God had against Israel and Judah. And then we went 6 through 27 last week about a lot of the judgments. We had the judgments on Judah, on Israel and Judah. That theme's going to continue kind of this week. We're going to take it from 28 through 39. So you remember the natural division of this book is easily divided in half. It's 66 books. The first 39, we know because we've talked about it. There's 66 books in the Bible. There's 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament. And this first thing that we're going to finish today is the first 39 chapters. Go through them. And that focuses on judgment and condemnation that God has on Israel, on Judah, and on the rest of the surrounding nations. Next week, I think is going to be a really exciting week because we're going to go ahead and finish this book up. We're going to do the last 27 chapters, 40 through 66, which focuses on redemption and salvation. It represents the 27 New Testament books. So it's a very interesting thing in the book of Isaiah. So we're going to go ahead and do 28 through 39, and we're going to get through it today. So
this is written from multiple authors. This book. Isaiah?
No. So we did talk a little bit about that the first week. I had Isaiah as the author with a question mark. There are people who don't believe in God's ability to tell someone prophecy, and the real one that hooks them up is in the chapter 40 through 66. God actually gives Isaiah prophetic information about Babylon, which is not a superpower at the time, and he also gives them about the demise of Babylon from Syria. And he names Syria, which is not a he names Cyrus, which is from Persia. So he names Persia's going to conquer Babylon, and he names the king of Persia, Cyrus, by name to Isaiah 150 years before this happens. So people who do not have faith in God, who do not think God knows the beginning from the end, like he declares, says this book could not have been written by one person. It had to be written by multiple people. So they have this two theories. One's Deutero-Isaiah, which is 2 authors, and one's a Trio-Isaiah, where there's 3 authors. I throw that out. I think it's garbage. It's lack of faith. I believe in a God who knows the beginning from the end. And he gave Isaiah this prophecy. So that had not always been the belief. The Hebrews have always thought of this as one book.
There's a guy at work that's went to seminary, and I was telling him, Isaiah and how it's so confusing to me, and he's like, well, it's because it's written by lots of different authors.
Yeah,
so, and I was like, okay, I know a little bit more about you now.
Yeah, that's a very modern thought that came much later when people started coming up with solutions on, well, God couldn't have parted the Red Sea. How could we naturally have the Red Sea dry up for them to cross? They started coming up with all these natural decisions. They also came up with multiple authors of Isaiah. Isaiah was the author. God says it was. The Hebrew Bible and the Tanakh believes it was. When we found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, guess what? Isaiah was not split up into multiple books. It's that one long scroll.
24 feet.
24 feet long, one scroll. So no, there's one author to the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. And I said this before too, but I'm going to say it again because it was brought up. All of that is true that I just said, 24-foot, one scroll found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, all that. But the biggest proof that Isaiah is the single author of the book of Isaiah is Jesus Christ, God in man form, quoted from Isaiah throughout the whole scroll. In the beginning, the first 6-7 chapters, in the middle, and in the end. He quoted giving credit to the prophet Isaiah. So if multiple authors would have wrote this, Jesus would not have given credit, knowing all things, to one man, and he did. So I don't care what modern theologians come up with excuses and different things. Jesus Christ validated that the book of Isaiah was written by the prophet Isaiah by quoting him and giving him credit for it. So that's that. So this is kind of an overview to catch us up from where we went. Remember, I talked about chapter 1 through 5, the court case. 6 was Isaiah was caught up into the throne room of God, surrounded by the seraphim. We talked about all of that. Then we get to the book of Emmanuel. That's where Ahaz was being attacked, and he was told to ask for a sign, and he pompously said, I'm not going to test the Lord my God. Well, he had already, the Bible tells us, had got a plan where he made an alliance, right? So it wasn't that he didn't want to test God. He's already trusting the world. And throughout the book of Isaiah, we see that Israel trusted their political alliances. We talked about from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, always running back to Egypt. And now Egypt's not necessarily the superpower, even though they kind of are dwindling one. Assyria is the big superpower coming in. They're trusting alliances in Assyria. They're trusting alliances in Egypt. Even today, you think about it, does Israel trust God for their sovereignty today?
No, they trust us.
They trust us. We're the new Egypt. We're the new Assyria, right? Israel trusts their military might.
Mm-hmm.
They do not give credit to God. The majority of Israelis are atheists. But God's chosen people. If you read, when we get to Ezekiel, we'll see the dry bones prophecy that prophesies that they're going to come back into the land. So we're going to see all that. But Israel comes to the United States thinking, we need the United States or the Muslim nations would wipe us out. So we're their new
For
Egypt.
now, it doesn't know if that's going to last.
Exactly. And it won't. We know it won't because prophecy says everybody, all nations will turn on Israel. So these last 17 prophets that we're going to see in the book of the Old Testament
Are they atheists or agnostics?
the majority of them are actual atheists. They do not believe there is a God. And I could get into a whole teaching on Israel and why and all that. There are a strong minority, 10, 15%, really Orthodox. I mean, so you have every possible religion in Israel. So it's something I can't get into now. There's Muslim, there's every type of faith you can imagine exists in Israel, but they're not by any means the majority.
The scripture says they would be brought back in unbelief.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. So anyway, so this gets us into what we're going to cover today. That's kind of what got us to here, and we're going to cover this the last remaining chapters here from 28 to 39, ending that first half of the book of Isaiah. it can be broken up into 3 sections. You start out with, we're going to look 28 to 33 are the 6 woes. Each one of those chapters is a woe and a judgment from God. And then 34 to 35 is 2 scenes that we're going to see. One is a near term and a far term look. The far term look takes us all the way to what we call the tribulation period, the 70th week of Daniel, those 7 years of God's judgment. And then the next chapter, 35, takes us beyond those 7 years to the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. We get a glimpse of this. The reason that Isaiah is so difficult, Doug, is because that advancement forward not only happens in 34 and 35, chapter 34 and 35, it happens sprinkled throughout the whole Bible. Whenever God does judgment, we're going to see in the woes, even in the woes, which are judgments, he sprinkles hope in there. And when he sprinkles hope, that's hope's about a future. So I would love it to have a book divided and saying, this is the judgment section, this is the restoration section, but it's not that divided and clean. It is back and forth. It's like you're watching a movie that has multiple things going on all over the world, and it's flashing
Flashback.
flashback.
Flash
forward.
forward.
She's
No, we
watched
do
a
that. I
TV
have
show
to say
called This Is
pause
Us.
and show me what they're doing.
She used to watch a TV show called This Is Us, and it was
Flashes.
generational. It would go in the past, and it was all.
If you miss the title that says 7 years ago, you're lost.
You are.
That's
And
right.
sometimes Hollywood's good, and they'll give the same guy they're talking about, he'll have a beard or a mustache
Right.
in one, but then in the future he's clean shaved, so you go, oh, now they're in the future. Now,
Yeah.
Isaiah doesn't do that for you. You have to just know.
Yeah.
I will tell you some clues, though. When you say, in that day, those type of things, in those days,
And those that
that
key.
transfers you to the future. So whenever you see that in writing, beware of what's coming, because it's not the present near-term fulfillment of that. It's a future fulfillment that's being prophesied about. And then 36 through 39 is kind of a historical interlude. We get partial future, partial near term, and we'll get to it when we get to it. Hezekiah is the king at that time, and it talks a little bit about what's going on in history. Okay, and then that ends. So that's kind of what we're going to do. How we're going to break these remaining chapters of 28 through 39 up. So let's just jump right into it. As I said, the first 6 chapters here of this are 6 woes. We have our first woe in chapter 28. And it says the fall of Ephraim becomes God's warning to Jerusalem. So a little bit of this, I have to talk about this too so you understand, because if you're just reading this and you say, the fall of Ephraim, who's Ephraim? Well, who is Ephraim? Ephraim's 8th son of Jacob. Remember, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob wrestles with God. God changes his name to Israel. He has 12 sons. That becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, Ephraim wasn't one of those original 12. Joseph, the 11th born out of the 12, was given the double blessing. You'd have thought it normally goes to the oldest, but we could go through why Reuben, Simeon, Levi, all of them disqualified themselves, all the way down to Joseph, who happens to be Rachel's firstborn, is given the double blessing. How did he do? He went off to Egypt. He ended up saving them. When he saved them and the whole tribe went to Egypt because of the drought, Jacob, or Israel, same person, adopted Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's where we get
After
Ephraim.
he had passed and after he had died, he adopted the
When he was dying, Joseph brought his 2 sons, and he adopted Joseph's 2 sons, giving Joseph the double portion.
Okay.
So if you're looking at the names throughout the Bible, if you're reading the Bible, there's always 12 tribes mentioned. They're not always the same 12. There's the original 12, which Joseph and Levi are in.
Right.
And then Levi is a priestly tribe. They can't go to war and they can't own land. So whenever the Bible's talking about the 12 tribes of Israel, whether to deal with war or whether it's to
land
do with the
division.
distribution of land, they drop Levi because they can't own land and they can't go to war. And they dropped Joseph and had Joseph's two sons,
sons.
Ephraim and Manasseh. You still have 12.
Okay.
So there's always 12, depending on the context of the conversation in the Bible, dictates which of the 12 the Bible's going to list. So, and I say all that to bring us to here to Ephraim. Ephraim became synonymous with all the 10 tribes of Israel. When you're reading the Bible, you have, after Saul, David, and Solomon, the United Kingdom, we have a divided kingdom. We
Right.
go through 20 kings on both sides. When you're in the divided kingdom, you have the 2 tribes of the south, which we're focusing on today, which is Judah and Benjamin. That's and they generically they just call it the tribe of Judah.
Right.
Interesting enough, not on the lesson today, Hebrew comes from Abraham, Israelites come from Jacob, changing the name, and Jews come from Judah, the tribe of Judah.
Right.
All 3 of those now are also synonymous with all 12 tribes. So this is what gets confusing to people. The origin of things and the use of things aren't always exactly the same. Okay. So, and that's what we have in Ephraim here. Ephraim became synonymous with all of Israel. So when you're reading the Bible, if you're coming along and you see Ephraim, that's the 10 tribes of the north. If you're reading along and you see Samaria, that's the capital of the northern tribes. That means all 10 tribes. And of course, if you see, reading along and you see the word Israel,
Yeah.
you have to know where you are in context, because it could mean all 12,
Or it could be the southern.
or it could be the northern 10
Okay.
tribes. Israel's the northern kingdom. Judah
Is
is
this-
always the southern 2 tribes. And you know that with Jerusalem, we'll have the same issue with Jerusalem. But anyway, so I say all that to say, when you're reading through Ezekiel, you will be confused when you hit Samaria, when you hit Israel, when you hit Ephraim. You need to know they're all the same 10 tribes. Judah's the 2 southern tribes. The 3 names for the northern 10 tribes is Israel, Samaria, and Ephraim. And that's why he starts out. Ephraim becomes a warning to Jerusalem. The principle of what's going to happen here is God's going to judge the northern 10 tribes. Remember, the northern 10 tribes, when we studied Kings and Chronicles, had no good kings. 20 bad kings. And God's finally going to judge them. And he's not judging them here yet. He's prophesying that you're going to be judged. And one of the purposes is to warn Judah not to go the same way. Remember, Judah also had 20 kings, or 19 and 1 queen, and 8 of them were good. The rest were bad. So Judah is going to last longer, about 130, 40 years longer than Israel. But this judgment on Israel is a warning to Judah. There's a lot of warnings today in our world, and they just go right over our head. We're going to look through this story here, if I get going on it, and we're going to say, they're going to say, how could they miss this? How could they miss this? But if we had time, I'd pause and show you all the places we're missing. The United States has been so blessed by God, but in our government and the majority of our people, you would never know it. If someone in the future looks back on us, they're going to say, how could the United States not give glory to God? I'm sure during the millennial kingdom we won't think about things like that, but if we did look back, we would do the same judgmental look on the United States because of the missed opportunity, the missed blessing, the missed seeing God's blessings, hands of blessing and protection on us, as we look back in history and see it with Judah and Israel. So,
Did everybody notice the new law that Texas has put in? With the Bible,
Dude.
taught the classes, will be taught the classes. I mean, you see a lot of wonderful things that refer to God at this country right now.
yeah. Yeah, and over our history, there's been a lot of little sparks
Yes.
of hope still.
Yes.
And interesting enough, through the whole book of Isaiah, and all 66 chapters, you see judgment and sparks of hope, and a little bit of repentance. Unfortunately, you got this much hope and respect and honor to God, and then the next one you get this much, and the next one. As time progresses on, it keeps shrinking. In the United States, I was shocked 9/11, how it only lasted a week, maybe two, where we had a united Congress, a united, everybody agreed. These catastrophes that normally brought us together under the umbrella of God still happen, still shake the spirit of the nation, but they've shrunk so much. They don't last a year, a month, weeks, and this is prophesied as well. Is if you look, the shadow or the type of what Israel is can be looked at on America. America's empire is no different than past empires, so we're going through the same cycles that other empires have gone through. And unfortunately, I don't want to say, but we're at the tail end or long in the tooth on the United States as an empire. So only by the grace of God does the United States still exist in the favor. So,
And it's the reading the Bible in classrooms is tricky for me because you're going to have the Bible taught by a lot of people who are not Christians. And that is, it
no
can
doubt.
be taught as a story. It can be taught, they can put their own twist on that. So I'm not sure if I don't have children in public school, but I'm not sure if I would want my children being taught the Bible as a story of the same story as
so
Cinderella or...
You're exactly right. So I think it's a shame that schools don't teach the history of the Bible. I mean, it's a historical document that is probably more documented than any other book we do teach.
Right.
But I don't want the schools to teach my children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren now, the theology.
Yeah.
I do not want to teach them.
Right.
That's my job. That's grandparents, great-grandparents, and parents' jobs.
Because
to
there's
teach
so
their
many
kids that.
teachers who are not Christian.
They're
and
not.
How are they going
But
to teach?
that doesn't mean that you don't teach the history.
Right.
You
And
know.
that's a different,
Yeah, it
that's
is.
a different angle
It is.
than teaching.
Well, and some Bible colleges and
Well, Bible
seminaries and
colleges
things
are
like that.
free play, right? They should be able to
Yeah,
teach
they-
theology. But anyway, so that kind of gets us away from this. But let's pull us back in here. So in chapter 28, verse 5, it says, "In that day." What's that tell you guys? We've said
End of days.
future. In fact, almost think of it this way: in that day, go after the church. So whenever you read "in that day" in the Old Testament, that the church is already gone. It's going to refocus. In that day, God says, "I'm going to refocus on my chosen people, on the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah." So whenever you say "in that day," have your mind advance to a future time. Now you got to determine, is this future time the 7 years talked about in Daniel, or is it the 1,000 years talked about, right? So there's two blocks of time in that day. And in that day encompasses both those periods, the 7 and the 1,000. So remember that when you're reading through this stuff. And it's, "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone of sure foundation." That statement right there in Isaiah is used. I got 3 examples here. If we had time, we'd go look at Romans and Peter to see how they used them. They're referencing that stone, that cornerstone, as Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the cornerstone of the building block of the church, right? In the Old Testament, there's a cornerstone in the temple, in the tabernacle. We're going to look at that in a minute here. The other thing I want you to catch as you're reading through Isaiah, and remember, I'm just giving you the headlines, the high level. You have to go read this stuff and study it to go and really understand it. So that cornerstone, or Zion, much like Ephraim encompasses all of the 10 tribes, Zion is a name for Jerusalem. Whenever you read Zion, you think of the city of Jerusalem, God's holy city. It's going to be the capital of where God reigns from, whether it's New Jerusalem or the Old Jerusalem for the Hebrews, for the Jewish people. I'm not going to get into it because we don't have time, but there's this whole separation that we're doing today in society. We have a problem with anti-Semitism, and we've had a problem throughout centuries with anti-Semitism. Satan is behind that, right? Today they're separating it, and they've got Zionist and anti-Semitism, and they're saying, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm against the Zionist. the Bible does not distinguish the difference of that. Zionist is the dry bones prophecy being fulfilled. God said, I'm going to do this. If you're against Zionist, you're against God's plan. That is God's plan laid out in the book of Ezekiel. When we get to Ezekiel, when we get to the dry bones prophecy, we will study that. And don't buy into this thing that's getting very, very popular. And they're saying, I'm not against the Jewish people. I'm against Zionists.
I had some of that verbatim. A girl I taught in high school came over here, fled in Lebanon, and she's Arabic but Christian, and she has relatives there. On Facebook, we got into a discussion about stuff, and she says, I love the Jews, but I'm anti exactly what you said. I said, you can't separate it.
No, if you read Ezekiel, not Isaiah, we're in Isaiah, but if you go to Ezekiel and read Ezekiel, you're against God's plan. God's plan lays out clearly 35, 36, 37, the dry bones prophet. If you're against the return to Jerusalem, you're stepping all over what God said, 1,500 years ago, or 2,500 years ago, what God said was going to happen. He said, this is going to happen. And he made it happen in 1946, 47, 48. And he completed in 48. So anyway, so that's that. So Zion is interchangeable in the Old Testament. It's Jerusalem. So the rest of 28, we get to this judgment thing, and the Bible calls it strange works, which I find it interesting. But the Lord shall rise up, that he may do his work, his strange work. What it's talking about there is he may do his judgment. The rest of this chapter is talking about the judgment. And it does an illustration on his judgment as he's rolling it out as a farmer. And it illustrates how a farmer knows how to farm land, how to plow, how to plant different types of crops, how to treat different crops differently. And he's using this illustration to say, I know how to judge Israel different than Judah, different than the nations, different than the whole world. That's the illustration here in the rest of this chapter, is God knows how to farm his land, and his land is the whole world. And this strange work it talks about in the rest of this chapter is how he's going to judge, starting with Israel to Judah to the nations surrounding them to the whole world. So it's kind of rolling out like that. Then we get to 29, chapter 29. What do we got? We got the second woe. And what I want to do here, so I did on the first woe was pride. So they were judged for Israel's pride. The second woe is hypocrisy. And what you have with hypocrisy is you've got people going through the motions, is what this chapter is going to describe. The second woe is judgment on religious people, but not relationships with God. So they were checking off, in our modern time, they go to church, they sing, they pray, but they have no personal relationship. And that's what these guys did. They had a dead religion that they were checking the boxes, they were doing their sacrifices, they were doing all the things they were supposed to do, and other things like Baal worship. And we learned through Kings and Chronicles, right? Even if they got a good king in, he might get Baal worship out of the temple, but he didn't get the totems and stuff down from all the regions and stuff. So they were going through the motions, but they weren't really honoring God or having a relationship with God. And it talks about the cornerstone again here, and it talks about Ariel. So we said Zion is another name for Jerusalem. This is once again why the book of Isaiah can be confusing if you don't know some context and some history. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's going to be the capital of the future kingdom of God, and it's Jerusalem. Now you have the old Jerusalem, you have the new Jerusalem, and then you have different names for Jerusalem. And we just said Zion is an interchangeable name for Jerusalem, but so is Ariel. And in this chapter 29, they're going to call Jerusalem Ariel. So it can get confusing. And they do this because the point that God's making in this chapter is judgment, right? And that judgment, you've got the tabernacle or the temple, and it's made up in sections, right? You got the Holy of Holies down here. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies, and only once a year on Yom Kippur on the Day of Atonement. He would enter there and do a sacrifice for all the nation. Only one person, the high priest. And then you got the holy place where all the priests, they did all their works. And we learned a little bit about this when we went through Leviticus, right? We learned all these, the purposes of all these things through Leviticus. Well, the priests served in the holy place. And then in the outer courts is where, or in the courts area is where the tabernacle, or no, the altar was, not the tabernacle, the altar. And that's where they did the sacrifices. So people would come in with their sacrifices for their family, themselves, and all that, and they would burn them on the altar, the burnt altar, and the bronze altar. And I have a bigger blow up of this, and why it's important is this top surface where the sacrifices were laid is called Ariel, and hearth. So when he's saying this, he is saying, he's kind of got a double. So the word Ariel has two meanings, and God kind of plays this word play with the nation as he's given this judgment. Ariel is a compound word, and it means lion and God. The first er means lion, and El. Whenever you see El at the end of a word, it means God, right? It's a shortened version of God, not Yahweh, but just that God. So this means lion of God is Ariel, but it also is a name that they had for the hearth, the where they put the sacrifices. So he's saying in this thing, when you're reading through it, you might miss it, but now when you read it, you should see it. He has this play on words that say, you think you're the lion of God, you think you're Ariel, the lion of God's power, but you're really the altar hearth, which is the name of that where they put the sacrifice, because I'm going to sacrifice you, Israel, to show Judah that you're sinful and you're going to be the sacrifice for Judah. So it's kind of a play on word that God's doing in chapter 29. It's easy to miss if you're just reading it, you'll miss it unless you know it. But if you study it and you know the different contexts and the names for things, you say, "Oh, that's funny, God. I mean, I see what God's doing here." You know?
Yeah.
So, anyway, so that's in 9.
It's the original dad joke.
Huh? It's original.
The creator can be creative.
So that's what's going on, and then the rest of 29 is the third. So 29 has two woes in it. So most of the times, the chapter, you remember, chapter breaks and verses are man-made, right? They're not God. And in this time, we have 6 chapters, but 2 woes exist in 29. So the second woe is in 29, and the third woe is also in the end of 29. So we have 2 woes in this chapter, and then the other chapters don't have a woe, but there's 6 chapters for the 6 woes. It would be nice if there was 6 chapters and 6 woes, and each woe was in a different chapter. But that's not the way the man laid it out. So,
Of course.
yeah, of course not. Yeah, we have to make it a little confusing. Sometimes I think they threw a dart and said, let's put a chapter break here, or let's put a verse break here. I'm thinking, sometimes they make perfect sense, but sometimes I'm thinking,
It's time to eat lunch. Just
yeah, exactly. In the chapter, let's move on. Okay, yeah, it doesn't make always sense, but anyway. So, and this woe is all about both Israel and Judah making plans that aren't God. We do that too, unfortunately. Sometimes we are just running so fast in life, we forget to pause and say, God, am I running down the right path? Am I running down your path? Am I doing what you want me to be doing with my life? So, we got to slow down sometimes. I've said this before. I think Satan's biggest tool and weapon is busyness. He makes us so busy, we don't have time to slow down, meditate, ponder on the Lord, and listen to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit does not hit us with a baseball bat and say, Scott, this is what I want you to do. He whispers. He's a gentleman and he whispers. If we don't slow down and listen, we're never going to hear the Holy Spirit. Israel and Judah were not slowing down. They were running. They were so busy with their life. They were not looking for God's plans. Woe to those who go to great depths to hide their plans from the Lord. He's actually accusing them of hiding their plans, right? Who do their work in darkness and think, who sees us and who knows? A lot of the world thinks that, right? They're out there thinking, no one can find, no, I'm sinning, but no one sees my sin. Well, God sees our sin. So, what did I do here? let's drop down to 29:13. And then the Lord said, because this people draw near with their words and honor me with their lip service, but they remove their hearts far from me, and their reverence from me consists of traditions, learning, and root. Remember, they're doing the right things. They're going to church. They're singing the hymns. They're praying, but God's accusing them. You're not doing it. Matthew 15 uses this. Jesus quotes this in Matthew 15. He says, "This people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teach as doctrines and precepts of men." And so he's accusing. So we've got Isaiah accusing the nation of Israel and Judah of this, and then you've got Jesus accusing the people of his day of this, and I assert that nothing's changed. We have this exact same problem today. You know, I don't believe Brookhaven. I mean, I don't speak for everybody or all that. I think Brookhaven's a great church, and we honor God. We look at God, and we're constantly praying to be in the will of God. But if you look at the church universal in the United States, we're making a transition. If you study the book of Revelation, the 7 churches, we're transitioning fast and hard from the church of Philadelphia to the church of Laodicea. And the church of Laodicea, God's on the outside knocking. Yes?
Yeah, and when just look at our government, you have the democracy, the visible government, and then you have essentially the deep state.
Yeah.
They operate in secret behind the U.S. Constitution is a shield, like the Bible is a shield, but they're doing evil behind the scenes.
Yeah. That is true. And yeah, we're no different than Israel. Israel did this, Judah did this, and the United States does this. Even though we have godly people in the United States, I think we even have godly people in the government. The mechanism and the system is so big in inertia, you can't stop what's coming, this future that's coming. This gets us to chapter 30 and gets us into the fourth woe, rebellion and false security. And this is a big theme in this book, is where is your security? Do you trust God or you trust man? And there's a lot of trusting going on. Of course, they trust Egypt. They trust Assyria. They're making alliances, you know. Judah is warned against trusting the alliance with Egypt. It says, "Woe to the rebellious children, declares the Lord, who executes a plan, but not mine, and makes an alliance, but not by my spirit, in order to add sin to sin." God's saying, because you're not seeking what my plan for you is, it's a sin. And so we know anything not of faith is a sin. The Bible, New Testament tells us. That's a tough life. I mean, thank God for the cross that we are forgiven from all our sins, because anything you do that's not a faith, that you do in your own strength, is a sin to God. And that's basically what he's telling Judah here. He's saying, you know, you've got plans and they're not my plans. And, you know, you've made plans, but not with my spirit. So that same thing is on us individually. We have this battle that goes on internally to us, the flesh and the spirit, right? Our spirit is constantly battling with our flesh. Is the plans that we're doing today, this week, next month, is it the flesh's plan or is it the spirit's plan? I don't know. You know, you got to go to the Lord in prayer, seek his will for your life. It's a constant battle. It's not something that you say, I did that, checked off, and it's done. Israel and Judah were doing that. They said, we checked this off, we're doing our sacrifices, we're good with God, and now let's go do our own thing. Let's make our own plans. And that's what he's judging them against. Verse 2 drops down. That's verse 1 I just read. Verse 2 drops down. Who proceeds down to Egypt without consulting me? So what's going on here, just high level? You've got a civil war going on with Israel and Judah, right? And they're battling with Aram, Damascus, and all this. And you have Judah running back to Egypt, which is not new to us. We've been seeing this. Abraham did it, you know, all the way. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they all, when a drought occurred in the promised land, rather than trusting God to carry us through that, they ran back to Egypt. That's constantly been kind of a throne. Even when Moses delivered them out of them, there were people rebelling, saying, "Let's go back to Egypt. You brought us out here for us to die." So this has always been a problem with the nation here, where they've always looked for an alliance of a superpower, and it was Egypt at the time, and it's still Egypt, even though right now in Isaiah's lifetime, Egypt was fading, and the real problem, the real threat is Assyria of the north is coming down. They still are trying to come back. And we're going to see in a couple chapters, Assyria doesn't care about Egypt. I mean, it talks about they're just waving caterpillars, well, not caterpillars, but cattails. The wind blows them around. They do not fear Egypt at all, because Egypt is definitely on the decline.
That was good.
So now we get to 30 and 15 through 33. We were already, we were on 30. That was the first part. Now we're in 15, the last half of 30. God's imitation. So God's prescription, grace after discipline. Okay, so in Isaiah 30:15 starts this way. This is what the sovereign Lord says, the Holy One of Israel says, in repentance and rest in your salvation, in quietness and trust is your strength. You would have none of it. He's telling them the answer, even though they're not going to do it, they're not doing it, and they're not going to do it. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. He's waiting and wanting them. This goes back to what I'm talking about today in our society. The Church of Laodicea, which is becoming the prominent and powerful voice of the church, God's on the outside of Laodicea, knocking, saying, "I'm knocking, let me in." In Isaiah's days, he's saying, "I'm asking you, I'm waiting for you. Test me and try me, but you're not going to. You don't, So section 2 goes, I forgot what I was going to say here. I'm sorry. I guess I have this 2 sections. Section 2, God talks about the kingdom blessing, and then in section 3, he talks about the judgment on the nation. Because they don't turn to him, the tone's going to change here, and he's going to bring judgment on both. He's going to show us here as we're coming a near-term judgment and a far-term judgment. Now, remember, there's always got to be a near-term fulfillment of a prophecy, even if the main thrust and purpose of the message is far-term, because if a prophecy doesn't come true, what happens to him? You stone him, you kill him. So God in his love and grace gives a prophet a message, and he shows the near term for validity to show he is a true prophet of God, but then the ultimate story or message that he's telling them is really got a much longer far-term implication to that prophecy. And that, thank God for us, because we get to read the Bible now and see, yes, history records that near-term fulfillment occurred, but the bigger picture of this is still yet to come. And lots of the prophecies, even though they were near and far term at the time the prophet gave it, they're history to us. Many of the prophecies, we can look in history and see. I mean, we already know, Assyria falls to Babylon, Babylon falls to Persia, Persia falls to Greece, Greece falls to Rome. We know those, whether they're Isaiah talking about the first parts of it or Daniel giving us a more complete picture of it, it's all history to us. But when they were saying it wasn't history. It was hundreds of years in the future or before it happened that these things were being talked about. 150 years in Cyrus's case. So anyway, 31 gets us to the 5th woe, trusting horses and chariots. This analogy, same thing, right? Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses and trust in the multitude of their chariots, and in great strength in their horsemen. But do not look to the Holy One of Israel or seek help from the Lord. We're going to see Hezekiah. So last week Uzziah was the king. He was an evil king, and Hezekiah, his son, Uzziah's son, is the king now. We're going to kind of see him trust in alliances, but he is going to go to the temple and pray as well. So he's going to turn to God because he's a good king, but doesn't mean good kings always do good things, right? They do bad things too. It's interesting. I put Psalms down in here. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. This is David's psalm, right? David wrote Psalm 20. And he's claiming we don't trust in the horses and chariots. You know, in Israel, they weren't even supposed to count their horses. They weren't supposed to do inventory on that because God did not want them to trust in their military power and buildup. Most nations keep track of their inventory. They keep track of how many tanks do you have? How many aircraft do you have? You do that to know what you can do and what because our trust is in our military. But God did not want Israel's trust to be in his military. He says, don't even count your horses or your chariots. Because they're not supposed to put their trust in those. But in 31, we show the fifth woes. These are all judgments. Remember, all 6 of these woes are judgments on them because they are trusting in those. And boy, am I running out of time. The Lord will defeat.
You're on woe 5. You're on woe 5.
So, 37, or not, I jumped forward. So 30 and 31 is the prophecy about all of this stuff is going to happen. We're going to get to, God willing, 37, which is the fulfillment of this prophecy. He's telling them it's going to happen right now, and it's going to happen, and it happens in 37. So, and I'm sorry, I am just going to go by these because we will not get to some good stuff here. 32, the coming king. So 32 is an interesting chapter. 32 goes from a positive, uplifting, to a negative, and back to a positive. So it's kind of this you get this whiplash, in Isaiah. So, and then, so the positive, when it starts talking about it, it's talking about the righteous reign of the Messiah will bring justice, understanding, and peace. As you read on, and I couldn't fit all the chapters in here, so you have to go read 32 for yourself, it gets very messianic languages about how it's going to be. And of course, verse 3, I stuck it in here. Well, let's first. See, a king will reign in righteousness, and rulers will rule in justice. And then it starts moving into 2, and then 3 says, then the eyes of those who will see, I can't read. Then the eyes of those who see will no longer be closed, and the ears of those who hear will listen. Remember these verses that we had in chapter 6, we're saying they have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Now we're saying there's going to come a time where the people who have eyes will see, and the people who have ears will hear. This is not Hezekiah's kingdom. Hezekiah is the king of Judah. This is not talking about that. This is that launch forward to the 1,000-year reign. When Jesus Christ will reign here on earth, this is a picture. So you should read the rest of this chapter on your own because it's a picture of the coming king and Jesus reigning during 1,000 years. It's not a whole chapter of that because remember, positive, negative, positive. This, once again, is what I warned you. It gives you a little bit, 6 verses or something like that, or 8 verses. And then it moves to the negative. So you would need to take all the positive verses out of all these, in fact, all 66 chapters, to build a complete picture of God's reign. So, 32, the women of Jerusalem. 32 is an interesting chapter because it turns to the negative and it talks about the women of Jerusalem. So this goes from trouble to restoration. It's going to start with a warning against the women of Jerusalem who are haughty, complacent. And when it's talking about the women of Jerusalem, it's not talking about the ladies. It is, but it's talking about the whole attitude of the nation. And it's describing them. Sometimes the Bible describes the daughters of Jerusalem. This is the women of Jerusalem. It's talking about the haughtiness and attitude of the nation itself. So it kind of encompasses all men, women, children. Everybody are being that way.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is that how women are seen?
Well, you remember when we went to the study, the women were uplifted as the holy honor, and they were also, it used the contrast of a good woman the Proverbs 31 woman,
Yeah.
and then it showed the haughty woman that's trying to attract people into her
I've
room.
seen those.
So we all want women, Proverbs 31 women, right? I mean, most, if you have Christ in your life, you are on your road path to that type of woman. But yeah, I mean, look at the harlot, Babylon.
You can spot them a mile away, right, guys?
I don't know what you're talking about.
You stay away.
I like the New Testament one where they're told to remain silent.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, Mary, you should have elbowed that.
I'm staying silent.
Yeah.
For now.
33 gets us to the sixth and final woe. Okay, so
What's the woes?
we're through the woes. God pronounces judgment on those who oppress His people and His land. He is judging them for the way the leadership is treating the people, the land. We know, not from Isaiah, but we know from Kings and others, they were not even following the land Sabbath, where every 7 years they're supposed to give the land a rest. He's judging them for in fact, they go into captivity because the length of time is determined by the number of land Sabbaths they skipped.
Right.
And that's why they go into captivity. So there's a great whole study around that. But so he's judging them. Isaiah is pronouncing, I'm judging you, God's judging you for the way you're treating the people and the land. So this is the woe. Woe to you, destroyers, you who have been destroyed. And 2 goes, O Lord, be gracious to us. We long for you. Be our strength every morning, our salvation in time of distress. In the final 6 woes, remember, they just had Isaiah telling them, woe 1, woe 2, woe 3, woe 4, woe 5. And the final, and they are now in verse 2 of the 6th woe, they're going and saying, oh Lord, So he's turning back to God. So this is a turning point of them repenting and going back to God. The 6th woe still human wisdom over, and God goes into the remaining part of this, the final judgment, that they're trusting nations and not Him. And that's basically in the 6 woes. That's probably the biggest message. The Lord's going to judge them because they're trusting their own strength and other nations, not them. Isaiah 33:24 says, no one living in Zion will say, I am ill. The sins of those who dwell here will be forgiven. It's at the end of 33, it jumps us once again to the future 1,000-year reign. You got it. Like I said, through all of these, it's interesting. Next week when we study, it's going to be all future. 40 through 66 is all about
The future.
The blessing, the restoration, the millennial kingdom. This, though, even though 31 through 39 is judgment, it's pretty much condemnation and judgment. Every chapter has a little promise.
Yeah.
It's judgment, but don't get too distressed because the future holds a future promise for you.
Okay, one slide back. One more. Okay, so the 6th woe in the first part of 33 is talking about the oppressors.
Yes.
And then the next slide is also part of the 6th woe, but it's talking about
The 6th woe, all 6 woes together is bringing them around to repenting back to God.
okay.
And then, so like I said, in fact, okay, so that's a good point, Mary. So we just had the 6 woes, and the 6 woes have kind of done their job. And then all of a sudden, remember, in those 6 chapters of the 6 woes, we had condemnation and judgment, but we had glimpses of praise and honor and restoration. And then all of a sudden, 34 and 35 completely changed. 34 comes hard. And I should spend an hour on this chapter, but we're not going to. This is 34 is all about the 70s week of Daniel. It's the final judgment. It thrusts us forward a whole chapter looking at those 7 years during the tribulation period. And it gets dark in judgment and condemnation, but guess what? The next very chapter, 35, is all about the reign. So you go a whole chapter in 34, about the judgment, and then 35 is all about the restoration and the millennial picture and how God is going to reign during the millennial picture. If I was going to teach this right, minimum we'd be a week on 34 and a week on 35. We would do it, it's kind of like splitting Isaiah, the 66 chapters up to 1 to 39, the condemnation, and then teaching 40 to 66 as the promise, and so is 34 and 35. 34 and 35 is a mini big picture of the 1 through 66. So, but we don't have time because we're running out of time. 36 to 39, the remaining chapters here, it's going to be a transition, and it's going to be so we just ended those chapters of looking at judgment on the nations, especially the 6 woes, and then not the overview, it would be an encapsulation or an explanation of all of the big picture of this in 34 and 35. And now we're going to kind of come back and settle back down and come to the near term again during Hezekiah's reign. And we're going to look at what God is doing in near term, dealing with Hezekiah and his kingdom, okay? We're probably not going to get real deep in this for time, but I want you to understand that it does exist. Isaiah declares prophetically is now tested. Everything we're going to look at now, we can look backwards and see that's history. We know what happened. We read history books that's going to talk about these invasions and stuff. So that's kind of what this is telling us here. So 36 is remember we have the civil war that's going on between Israel, the 10 tribes of the north, and Judah. We've seen a lot of that in Kings. That war is constantly going on. Assyria is coming into power right now. Assyria is used by God to discipline Israel. The 10 tribes of the north is conquered. Remember in 722, we learned in Kings, is when Assyria comes down in 722 BC and carries off Israel. It hadn't happened yet. This is the start of this happening. And then what happens now is, no, maybe it has happened. I'm sorry. It has happened. They carry it. Now Assyria is surrounding Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem, Judah made an alliance with Assyria because Israel had made an alliance with Damascus, Aram, and they were attacking them. And Assyria attacked Israel, got rid of that problem. But now Assyria is coming down on Judah and surrounding Judah. And it's all about Syria surrounding Jerusalem, and making all types of insults against them and stuff. We learned a lot about this in Kings, and I'm going to bring that up in a minute. It says, let's just read 36:7 here. But if you say to me, we are depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one? Oh yeah, this is okay. I remember I put this in there. So this is King, and I'll probably butcher his name, Sennacherib. Remember King Sennacherib from the Kings and Chronicles, where he came and surrounded them. He sends an envoy and an army down there, and they're making all types of insults, and he's telling them here in 7, but if you say to me, we're dependent on the Lord your God, he said, if you're dependent on your Lord your God, isn't he the one that you tore all the high places around? This shows the world's complete ignorance to God's power. Hezekiah became king after Uzziah. Uzziah dies. Hezekiah is his son. He becomes king, and he cleans out the temple. Remember, he's a good king. He cleans the temple, gets rid of Baal worship. He gets rid of the Asher poles that are worshiping these false gods. And now Assyria, the king Sennacherib, is saying, how can you even claim God when you got rid of all his temples? You got rid of all his... He's insulting Hezekiah for getting rid of false gods as if they were real gods, is I guess the best way I can say that. So it's just the ignorance of the world. It's funny, the world does that today too, where they think, their definition of our God is different than the one true God, right? And so they don't understand, they think even
It's slander. That's basically.
Yeah, he's definitely slandering God. He is slandering God over and over, and he continues to do this. This is the slide I had when we went through Kings. So we're not going to be able to go through it again. But when we went through Kings, we talked a lot about Sennacherib, the king, and he sends his spokesperson. I butcher his name too, and I can't remember what it was. It's probably in here. But he's sitting there laying insult after insult on Hezekiah, and Hezekiah is God. So that's what happened in Kings here. I'm going to go through. This causes, so we took a little interlude. We went from 36, Sennacherib surrounding them, making these insults. This is Kings. If you want to go, remember I said you had to kind of put these together to get the complete picture of it. This was the Kings slide we did. And now we got 37, chapter 37 here. So we got 37, 38, 39 left here. And I'm going to try to really fast. Hezekiah's prayer. So Hezekiah prays to God. He rips his clothes. He goes into the temple and he prays God to save him, which should have been their decision all along before they went to Assyria when Israel was attacking, before they went to Egypt. It's all their alliances. They should have ripped their clothes, gone into the temple, put ash on them, and prayed to God all along. That's how their first choice should have been. So they go about Hezekiah's prayer. Isaiah says to him, tell your master, this is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid of what you have heard. Those words with which the underlings and of the kings of Assyria have blasphemed me. So God's saying, don't worry about it. I'm insulted that they're saying this about me too. I will protect you. And if you read the whole chapter, that's what you're going to see. Isaiah, through God, is telling Hezekiah, I'm going to come to your rescue. I'm going to save you. And so this is him telling Isaiah that. And then the next part of this chapter is the turning point. And what happens is faith replaces fear and prayer replaces panic, which is where we should start from the beginning. So because Hezekiah did these things, that he went into prayer, he went to the house of God, and he sent for the prophet Isaiah and said, what does God have us do? This is what Isaiah tells them in the last part of 37. Then the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all dead bodies. So this is, I kind of blew past the earlier chapters and I shouldn't have. I missed it. Isaiah told Hezekiah, God will defeat Assyria without human intervention, without human swords. And when he told him that, I mean, you're thinking, how? And then we get to this part of it, and he's told God, an angel. Just think about this. One angel. God sent one angel, and he took out 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Remember when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter pulled out his knife and tried to protect him, and Jesus said, no, put your knife away. If I wanted to, I could call a legion of angels. If one angel could do this, and God had access, Jesus had access to a legion of angels, it is beyond our comprehension, the power of God, even the power of angels. It's beyond our comprehension, the power of God's creation in angels, let alone God who spoke a universe into existence with words. We cannot play in this world, guys. We cannot understand this. But we can't understand the immense power of God. But what we can understand is the failure of history and the success of history. And what we get out of Isaiah, the failure of history was trusting in our own strength, trusting in the government, trusting in other nations. That was the failure, instead of going to God in prayer. Once they went to God in prayer, everything started to work out. I'm kind of a history buff, and I know during the Constitutional Convention, we had different colonies and different ideas and different people thinking, and they were arguing constantly. And the story goes that Benjamin Franklin, who a lot of people think he's not a Christian, but he said, stop. He goes, before this, we used to open up in prayer and everything seemed to work good. Now we're trying to build this Constitution and we're having nothing but bickering. I propose, Benjamin Franklin, the supposed non-Christian, he goes, I propose we open up every session in prayer. And that still exists today. And the story goes that once they did that as the Constitutional Convention, everything started clicking and happening. and the Constitution just came together. And it's true. If we start our life, we start out in prayer. That's the message of this. I'm because we're out of time. I'm kind of going to blow by this stuff. This ends kind of with a down because 1 through 39 chapters is condemnation and judgment. Hezekiah gets ill. He's gonna die. We learned about this when we did Kings too. He prays to God. Isaiah comes to him and says, "Get your house in order because you're going to die." And so he once again, like he did when he was being attacked by Assyria, rips his clothes. He goes to the temple in prayer and he prays. And God hears his prayers, sees his tears, sends Isaiah back to him. But he just sent Isaiah to him saying, "You're going to die, get your house in order." But because of his prayers and tears, which is the importance of prayer, prayer can change things. God sends Isaiah back to Hezekiah and says, "I'm going to add 15 years to your life." And he does. So Isaiah does not die like he was prophesied that he was going to do. He lives for 15 more years. The sign that we learned, once again, this is my slide I used in Kings when we talked about this. God backs up the sun. He doesn't just stop time. He backs up the sun 10 steps, showing Isaiah he's going to get 15 years added to his life. Why 10 steps instead of 15? Because 15 years, I don't know. But he gives Isaiah 15 more years of his life. So you think, Hezekiah's a good king, right? He's going to wisely use these 15 added years to his life. Not really. So thrust in forward in time, what happens is, the Bible tells us in 39, the last chapter we're going to cover today, Babylon, who's now becoming the superpower, Assyria's fallen down, Babylon's coming in. They sent an envoy to Hezekiah. Hezekiah brags. He takes them and shows them everything. He shows them their treasure, all their gold, their chariots, their horses, everything about this envoy from another country. He shows, and Isaiah, of course, calls him on and says, "Let's show him everything." And he goes, because of that, they're going to come back to you, and they're going to invade you. They're going to take everything, not during your lifetime, but by your children's lifetime and your grandchildren's lifetime. And sure enough, we know that we studied in Kings, it's a three-phase thing. Babylon comes and takes in 701, and then maybe not 701, that's the northern tribe. But in 586 BC, the third wave comes in and they destroy the temple. They completely wipe the temple, take everything, right? So this, Hezekiah did not use his additional 15 years well. All of us are using our 15 years right now. Most of us, I should say. I won't put us all in the same. Let's use our last 15 years well, right?
Amen.
Because Hezekiah did not. So anyway, I know, guys, that was fast. I'm sorry. A lot of content there, but it's an overview. I always say, what I try to do is whet your appetite so you'll go study this stuff deeper. Next week's going to be a great, the last 27 chapters of Restoration. It's the climax of the book, kind of thing. So, any questions?